Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind. Up your mind.
Who was among the circle that Kavanaugh traveled in?
Sure. So many of them quite prominent today. Alex Azar is the current Health and Human Services Secretary. He was working in the Starr investigation at the time. Barbara Comstock was an investigator on the House committee, really zealously going after the Clintons. She's currently a member of Congress from Virginia. There are media personalities like Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham from Fox. Everyone knows Matt Drudge. This was the circle. And the point here, I think, is that I knew Brett as a partisan warrior. His representation of himself now in black robes is just not who he is. I know who he was, and he was just like we were, engaged in partisan politics, partisan war. He is in his bones a Republican operative, and I think there are a couple things that I point out in this piece that I think show him to be really unfit for this office. One is his role as the kind of the point man for leaking when he was in the Starr investigation, leaking information to the press. Now that's something that a prosecutor doesn't typically do. It's kind of abhorrent behavior for a prosecutor, but they were engaged in a partisan political move against the Clintons in that investigation. So they were strategically leaking. He played a role there. The Vince Foster investigation, Vince Foster committed suicide. He was a White House lawyer. Was a friend of Hillary Clinton's. That investigation was closed by the first special counsel. When Ken Starr took over at Brett Kavanaugh's urging, they reopened that case. They spent a year and a half and millions of dollars terrorizing the Foster family for naught, to conclude again that he had committed suicide and wasted all that time and money on a political smear campaign.
Okay, so that was David Brock, and that was the clip from yesterday. There were three great clips. Joy did an amazing interview on MSNBC on Saturday on AM Joy with David Brock, who was part of this group. There was a piece that David Brock wrote. A lot of people read it. Some of you didn't. It was in the homework for yesterday, if you want to read it, where he says, they would all come to his Georgetown, Tony home, and they'd smoke cigars and they'd plot and plan and, scheme how to get rid of Bill Clinton. And Brett Kavanaugh was a leaker, and he was leaking materials to Ken Starr in order to, get Bill Clinton impeached, which happened. Fast forward to today. In order to get to today, and in order to get to the hearings where Brett Kavanaugh is being discussed by Republican senators who were also there in the 90s and who were also there in the early 2000s, when Brett Kavanaugh was leaking information stolen from Democratic senators on the Judiciary Committee to people who were going to question Supreme Court nominees and high court nominees put forward by the Bush administration. These senators were there then. Orrin Hatch was there then. Lots of them. Leahy was there then. And they know what he did. So here's where we're going to start. We're going to go back to 2004, because that's how it's going to go. All right? This is how it's all going to make sense to you. In fact, let me go back to 2002. In 2002, documents were stolen, emails were stolen from Democrats sitting on the Senate Judiciary Committee. When the Democrats reported that their documents had been stolen, confirmation documents, strategy documents, things that questions they wanted to ask Supreme Court nominees, federal courts nominees. When they knew their documents were stolen, They notified the Senate Sergeant at Arms, who's in charge of the Senate floor. There was an 18-month investigation. They got the results of that investigation in 2004. So let's read the New York Times article from March 5th, 2004. It's called Report Finds Republican Aides Spied on Democrats. And here's what it says. For 18 months, at least 2 Republican Senate staff aides engaged in unauthorized and possibly illegal spying by reading Democratic strategy memorandums on a Senate computer system, according to a report released on Thursday by the Senate Sergeant at Arms. The 65-page report concluded that the 2 Republican staff aides, both of whom have since departed, improperly read, downloaded, and printed as many as 4,670 files concerning the Democrats' tactics in opposing many of President Bush's judicial nominees. The report, the result of an investigation undertaken at the request of the Senate Judiciary Committee, suggested that many other Republican staff aides were involved in trafficking in the stolen documents. Quote, this is going to take your breath away. I'm mortified that this improper, unethical, and simply unacceptable breach of confidential files occurred, Senator Orrin G. Hatch, the Utah Republican, who is chairman of the Judiciary Committee, told reporters, quote, there is no excuse that can justify these improper actions. Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, the committee's ranking member, said, quote, this report indisputably shows that this secret surveillance was calculated, systemic, and sweeping in its scope. He added, it's not difficult to conclude that this was criminal behavior. The report was supposed to be released with the names of the individuals involved redacted, but a copy was mistakenly released with the names included. The report identified the 2 former Republican staff aides as Manuel C. Miranda, who had already been named as a central figure in the investigation, and Jason Lundell, whose name had not been previously known. Investigators said an inexperienced computer coordinator did not make files properly inaccessible. Mr. Lundell observed the coordinator opening files with a few keystrokes and then copied what he had done. He watched this guy over his shoulder and then copied the keystrokes. For the next 18 months, according to the report, Mr. Lundell supplied documents to Mr. Miranda after gaining access to the files of staff aides for Senator Edward M. Kennedy of Massachusetts, Dick Durbin of Illinois, Joe Biden of Delaware, Dianne Feinstein of California, Russ Feingold of Wisconsin, and Patrick Leahy of Vermont. The largest number of files came from Senator Dick Durbin's office. Some information sought by Mr. Miranda and provided by Mr. Lundell, according to the report, was about how Democrats would question some nominees. Mr. Leahy wrote to Alberto Gonzales, the White House counsel. Alberto Gonzales was the Don McGahn. And then Kavanaugh became the Don McGahn. Now Don McGahn is the Don McGahn. Okay, just so you know. Mr. Leahy wrote to Alberto Gonzales, the White House counsel, asking if his office received any of the stolen documents. In response, Mr. Gonzales offered a denial that was less than categorical, saying, quote, I'm not aware of any credible allegation of White House involvement in this matter. Consequently, there has been no White House investigation and no effort to determine whether anyone in the White House was aware or involved in these activities. In a statement issued Thursday night, Mr. Miranda, who had been senior counsel to Mr. Hatch and, here's a blast from the past, Senator Bill Frist of Tennessee, who resigned in shame. The majority leader said, quote, "The report draws conclusions or observations that are ludicrous and easily placed into context." He said that it was fundamentally wrong to consider the Democratic strategy documents as confidential because they were easily accessible. In an interview, Mr. Miranda said that the report did, however, confirm his contention that there was no hacking, meaning they didn't have security walls that needed passwords that I breached. Mr. Lundell was described in the report as young and curious, just a clerk eager to impress his superiors. The report said he freely admitted to Senator Hatch. Let me repeat that. He freely admitted to Senator Hatch and investigators what his role was and left Washington to attend graduate school to be an accountant in Texas. His whereabouts could not be determined. The report named 4 other Republican staff aides who might have read the documents but did not cooperate with investigators. Senator Charles Schumer, Democrat of New York, said he believed that an independent counsel with subpoena power should be named by the Justice Department to investigate whether any crimes were committed. That's 2004. Okay, that is the conclusion of a 18-month investigation that clearly showed that over a period of 18 months, you had Mr. Miranda, Manuel Miranda, and his friend Mr. Lundell stealing Democratic Senate Judiciary members' documents about how they would approach and question Supreme Court, not just Supreme Court, federal court nominees put forward by the Bush administration. Okay, so we have that now, right? Now we have Lisa Graves. Lisa Graves is the author of many of these stolen documents. And Lisa Graves wrote on the 7th of September, just a few days ago, in Slate magazine, an article entitled, "I Wrote Some of the Stolen Memos That Brett Kavanaugh Lied to the Senate About." And she writes the following, and I'm going to insert the clips as we go through hers, okay? She writes, "Much of Washington has spent the week focusing on whether Judge Brett Kavanaugh should be confirmed to the Supreme Court. After the revelations of his confirmation hearings, the better question is whether he should be impeached from the federal judiciary. I did not raise that question lightly, but I'm certain now it must be raised. Newly released emails show that while he was working to move through President George W. Bush's judicial nominees in the early 2000s, Kavanaugh received confidential memos, letters, and talking points of Democratic staffers stolen by GOP Senate aide Manuel Miranda. That includes research and talking points Miranda stole from the Senate server after I had written them for the Senate Judiciary Committee as their chief counsel for nominations for the minority, the Democrats. Receiving these memos and letters alone is not an impeachable offense. Oh, no. Kavanaugh should be removed because he was repeatedly asked under oath as part of his 2004 and 2006 confirmation hearings for his position on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit about whether he had received such information from Miranda, and each time he falsely denied it. For example, in 2004, Senator Orrin Hatch asked him directly if he received, quote, any documents that appeared to you to have been drafted or prepared by Democratic staff members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Kavanaugh responded unequivocally, no.
Did Mr. Miranda ever share, reference, or provide you with any documents that appeared to you to have been drafted or prepared by Democratic staff members of the Senate Judiciary Committee?
No, I was not aware of that matter ever until I learned of it in the media late last year.
Did Mr. Miranda ever share, reference, or provide you with information that you believe or were led to believe was obtained or derived from Democratic files?
No. Again, I was not aware of that matter in any way whatsoever until I learned it in the media.
Do you know if any other associate White House counsels had access to these type of materials that were improperly taken?
I don't know of anyone who was aware of this matter, again, until the media reports late last year.
But you were not?
I was not aware of it.
Okay.
Okay. Orrin Hatch's senior counsel stole the documents and gave them to Brett Kavanaugh. That's what happened. He's asked about it by Orrin Hatch. Cover for my staffer. And he lies. In 2006, now, the reason why there were two hearings is because Kavanaugh was not confirmed when he was first nominated in 2004. And this is one of the reasons. So his nomination lingered for like 2 years. And they had another confirmation hearing for him, same position, D.C. Circuit. And in 2006, Senator Ted Kennedy asked him if he had any regrets about these documents that he had received from Miranda that he learned were stolen. And Kavanaugh rejects the premise of the question, saying, I never saw any of these documents.
The documents that were taken here from the committee, and that you have the familiarity, Randi, documents, and you've indicated that you, in reviewing them, had no understanding or awareness that they had been taken, been stolen. Have you ever gone back now that you are aware of it and seen what decisions you may or might not have taken on the basis of documents that were illegally taken, to see whether you may have made some judgments or decision or reached certain conclusions now that you know that they were not properly taken? Have you ever thought, well, I ought to go back. I might have made some judgments or decisions when I was working for the president, and I ought to take a look at this since you know that these documents now were taken? Have you ever thought about that?
Senator, there's a very important premise in your question that I think is incorrect, which is I didn't know about the memos or see the memos that I think you're describing. So I think.
Oh, you never saw any of those?
No, Senator, that's correct. I don't know. I'm not aware of the memos. I never saw such memos.
He never saw them. Okay. So 2004, he tells Orrin Hatch that he didn't know anything about stolen documents except what he read in the newspaper. In 2006, he tells Senator Kennedy he never even saw these documents. The premise of his question is, did you ever have any regrets about using these pilfered documents, these stolen documents? And he goes, I reject the premise of your question. I never saw these documents. See, back then, the senators did not have the emails that they have now. What they have now are the emails. This is what the Senate tried to put out into the public. Remember the confidential committee-only emails? Remember the contretemps over that? Okay. Well, back then, the senators did not have the emails that they have now. And the emails that they have now show that Miguel Miranda sent Brett Kavanaugh numerous documents containing what was plainly the stolen research that the Democrats had done. Some of the emails went so far as to warn Kavanaugh not to distribute the Democratic talking points he was being given, because these documents were shared from the Democratic side of the aisle as stolen, and don't tell anybody, and what it was it was marked not for distribution. And what it was the precise strategy to fight some controversial Republican nominations that the Republicans were putting forward. There is another email chain The other email chain includes the subject line that the senators now have. And the subject line on that email is entitled spying. That, according to Lisa Graves, and of course your common sense, it's hard to imagine a more definitive clue than that at the top of an email. Another email said, quote, Senator Leahy's staff has distributed a confidential letter to Dem counsel. And then it described for Kavanaugh the precise confidential information that the Democrats had gathered against a nominee that Kavanaugh was boosting. In the hearing this week, Senator Patrick Leahy noted that the previously hidden emails were now in his possession, and that these emails clearly showed that Miguel Miranda asked to meet Brett Kavanaugh in person to give him the paper files with, quote, useful info to map out Senator Joe Biden and Dianne Feinstein and others. It promised information that included, quote, Biden speak. And in response to Leahy's questions this week, with the emails in hand, Kavanaugh then changes his entire previous testimony.
Did Mr. Miranda send you an email asking you why the Leahy people were looking into her financial ties?
Is that what this email is?
I'm just asking you.
Well, can I take a minute to read it?
Of course.
Okay.
And this incident was 4 days before her hearing on July 23rd.
4 days before a confirmation hearing. Here it is. Brett Kavanaugh is clearly CC'd on this.
Did I send any of the emails on this chain? I don't think so. I think I'm CC'd.
Yeah, you're CC'd. You never saw it?
In any event, if he said, why are the Leahy people looking into this? From Manny Miranda. I don't really have a specific recollection of any of this, Senator, but it would not have been at all unusual for, and this happens all the time, I think, which is the Leahy people are looking into this and the Hatch people are looking into that. I think.
You say all the time, 2 days before the hearing, he told you that the Democrats were passing around a related 60 Minutes story, and he said his intelligence suggests that Leahy will focus on all things money. Well, that appears to come from a stolen email to me, stolen by the Republican staff member, sent to me the night before, and then given to you the next morning. Mm-hmm. Were you aware that you were getting from Mr. Miranda stolen emails?
Not at all, Senator. It was part of what appeared to be standard discussion about. It's common, Senator, for at the White House, it'd be common to hear from our Ledge Affairs team. This is, in fact, in this process, it's common to hear. This is what Senator X is interested in. This is what Senator Y is going to focus on.
Was it common to have copies of a private email sent to a particular senator?
Copies of a private email sent to a particular senator?
Yes. Wouldn't that jump out at you? For example,
what are you referring to?
Well, Mr. Miranda is telling you about emails sent to me the night before. There'd be no way that he would even have that unless he stole it.
Right. Boom. Never saw it. Didn't happen. Only know what was in the newspaper. Now they have the emails after all these years. And the emails are clearly Senator Leahy's emails. 4 days before the confirmation hearing, I'm guessing this was Priscilla Owens' confirmation hearing, because Priscilla Owens, she had handled an abortion case. Of course she did, as a Republican nominee, and it involved parental consent. And her funders were groups and businesses who had cases like this in front of the courts of Texas, and they wanted to question her about her money, about the kind of funding she was getting, and was it affecting her decision making, okay? And so Leahy wrote an email to other Democrats on the Judiciary Committee saying we should focus on the money. We should follow the money with Priscilla. I'm guessing it's Priscilla Owens because they don't mention it here. But I'm guessing that's what it is, because Lisa Graves said that there were two particularly disgusting nominees. One was Priscilla Owens and the other one was Miguel Estrada, and that these were the ones that she had written. And she wrote them as the chief counsel to the minority on the Judiciary Committee, the Democrats, and sent it to Leahy. And Miguel Miranda stole it. The email between Lisa Graves and Senator Pat Leahy, which is counsel to Senator, he stole it and gave it to Brett Kavanaugh through an email, CC'd Brett Kavanaugh, and all these years he's been lying about receiving them. Now his testimony is, oh, that's normal. It's standard operating procedure. Everybody does. The Ledge Affairs guy communicates with. No, the Democrats don't share what they're going to ask Priscilla Owen about her money trail and her funders, and whether her funders are causing her to rule in a certain way when it comes to an abortion case. Because they wanted to block what they considered an extremist judicial nomination by the White House. That is not normal. Leahy goes even further. And, Leahy wants to so badly show us, the American public, even more emails that he currently has. But he can't, because the Judiciary Committee has marked those emails committee confidential. And Leahy cannot make committee confidential memos, emails, letters that he has available for the public to read. But Leahy has evidence showing that Kavanaugh lied to the Senate Judiciary Committee during the 2004 and 2006 hearings.
You had the full text of my letter in your inbox before anything had been said about it publicly. Did you find it at all unusual to receive a draft letter from Democratic senators to each other before any mention of it was made public?
Well, the only thing I said on the email exchange, if I'm looking at it correctly, Senator, was who signed this, which would imply that I thought it was a signed letter.
But you saw it.
It was sent to you. Were you surprised to get it? I mean, it's obviously a draft. It's got typos and everything else. Were you surprised the draft letter circulated among Democrats ended up in your inbox?
But
from Mr. Miranda.
I think the premise of your question is not accurately describing my apparent recollection or understanding of the time, because I wouldn't have said who signed this if I thought it was a draft. And my email says who signed this.
So you didn't realize what you had was a stolen letter signed by me, that you had a letter that had not been sent to anybody, had not been made public?
Well, all I see that I said was who signed this. That's all I see.
Oh.
Yeah, well, what you need to see, Mr. Cross every T, dot every I, what you need to see is the date on the email. The date on the email that contains stolen documents predates the 2004 New York Times article that I read. The date on the email is before the investigation into the stolen emails was completed by the Senate Sergeant at Arms. Before. And you testified in 2004 and in 2006 that you never even saw the document that you were CC'd on. You never saw it.
Did Mr. Miranda ever share, reference, or provide you with any documents that appeared to you to have been drafted or prepared by Democratic staff members of the Senate Judiciary Committee?
No, I was not aware of that matter ever until I learned of it in the media late last year.
Did Mr. Miranda ever share, reference, or provide you with information that you believe or were led to believe was obtained or derived from Democratic files?
No. Again, I was not aware of that matter in any way whatsoever until I learned it in the media.
Do you know if any other associate White House counsels had access to these type of materials that were improperly taken?
I don't know of anyone who was aware of this matter, again, until the media reports late last year.
But you were not?
I was not aware of it.
Okay.
Okay. 2 years later?
The documents that were taken here from the committee, and that you have the familiarity, Randi, documents, and you've indicated that you, in reviewing them, had no understanding or awareness that they had been taken, been stolen. Have you ever gone back now that you are aware of it and seen what decisions you may or might not have taken on the basis of documents that were illegally taken, to see whether you may have made some judgments or decision or reached certain conclusions now that you know that they were not properly taken? Have you ever thought, well, I ought to go back, I might have made some judgments or decisions when I was working for the president, and I ought to take a look at this since you know that these documents now were taken? Have you ever thought about that?
Senator, there's a very important premise in your question that I think is incorrect, which is I didn't know about the memos or see the memos that I think you're describing. So I think.
Oh, you never saw any of those?
No, Senator, that's correct. I don't know. I'm not aware of the memos. I never saw such memos.
I never saw them. I never saw them. Well, Patrick Leahy now has the emails that you were copied on where you saw them.
You had the full text of my letter in your inbox before anything had been said about it publicly. Did you find it at all unusual to receive a draft letter from Democratic senators to each other before any mention of it was made public?
Well, the only thing I said on the email exchange, if I'm looking at it correctly, Senator, was who signed this.
But this is
which
stolen.
Would imply that I thought it was a signed letter.
It was sent to you. Were you surprised to get it? I mean, it's obviously a draft. It's got typos and everything else. Were you surprised the draft letter circulated among Democrats ended up in your inbox?
But
from Mr. Miranda.
I think the premise of your question is not accurately describing my apparent recollection or understanding of the time, because I wouldn't have said who signed this if I thought it was a draft. And my email says who signed this.
So you didn't realize what you had was a stolen letter signed by me, that you had a letter that had not been sent to anybody, had not been made public?
Well, all I see that I said was who signed this. That's all I see.
You need to look at the date, okay? Because you lied. You lied under oath in 2004. You lied under oath in 2006. And Senator Patrick Leahy asked Kavanaugh about the documents that have been listed as committee confidential by Chuck Grassley, the now Judiciary Chairman. Leahy actually said that he was told, quote, a mole provided secret information related to nominations. And Kavanaugh says, oh, I don't recall such an email. I don't recall it. And Leahy has that email, but he can't pull it out. He can't show you that email. He can't show you the receipt because Grassley marked it committee confidential. But Leahy has it.
Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.